Welcome everyone. We are so excited that you guys are here tonight. My name is Olivia Howell and I am the campus staff minister for InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. This event was actually coordinated and put on by the students you see up on the stage. They've been planning and preparing this event for many, many months. And we are so excited that it's finally here. This event, Normalizing Christian Mental Health, the Christian Perspective, is something that is really near and dear to the students on the stage, as we're going to hear later. But there's a lot of stigma in our world, in our campus, in our church about mental health. That I personally have heard comments of, if you were a Christian, maybe you wouldn't actually be struggling with mental health. Or we have this need to appear perfect and not to have these conversations, to let people know that we're not okay. And the purpose of this event is to start normalizing these conversations. That it wouldn't just be a blip. This would be a start of something on our campus where we can start being open and vulnerable with each other about what we're struggling with and to care for our people well. Let's talk about how the Lord actually can redeem this and actually use this in some really cool ways. That I am a campus staff minister and have personally struggled with anxiety and depression. And because of that, I'm actually able to use that in my ministry to have conversations with people about mental health. And the Lord is actually using that as a powerful tool. So he can redeem these things and actually turn them for good. So we're super excited to have you guys here. Kind of an overview of what tonight's going to look like. So we have two counselors who are here with us tonight. One's going to give us some general information about mental health, particularly on college campuses. And then one's going to go more talk about a Christian perspective on mental health. And then we have our 5 student speakers who are just going to share, what is their experience, what is their story, and how is the Lord working in that. So I'm going to pray for us, and then we're going to get started. So if you guys would bow your heads. Father, Son, Spirit, we thank you for this time and this space, for these conversations. Lord, you have used some really messy people for your kingdom. You used Moses with his social anxiety. You used Elijah, who asked if you would kill him, Lord. That you have been using messy, broken people in really mighty ways for a long time. We pray that this would be a great start of something on campus, that would be a start or a continuing of these conversations, that we would learn how to love our people well, and we will listen well when we have these conversations. We pray that you would be in this space and with these speakers. In your name we pray. Amen. So our first speaker for the night is Erica Coates. She is a counselor with Cook Counseling, has been doing that counseling for a long time, but has been particularly at Virginia Tech since 2017. Kind of her specialty, who she works with people struggling with trauma, relationship difficulties, anxiety, and depression, and also with people who feel marginalized, people who feel like others. So she's going to come up and give us some general information about mental health on a college campus, and what resources are available and how do we care for those people well. So if you guys will join me in welcoming Erica.
Did I really just date myself? I mean, do people do that? Help me. Thank you. The 36-year-olds in the crowd. We got it. Hi, I'm Erica, and just to solve the mystery, these are in fact bunny stamps on my work-related paper. You're welcome. Those from my daughters. They're artistic. What can you do? And I'm reusing, environmentally friendly. So I kind of have 3 little subtopics to address in my few minutes. One is a little bit about prevalence rates of mental health and maybe why these rates are skyrocketing in our country and with this age group. So I'd like to kick it off by saying that mental health diagnosable illnesses have always been here. So we're just getting more language for it now. And in a minute, I'm going to poo-poo the internet and social media, but for now I'm going to say this is a good thing because that really fuels us getting to share and talk and learn and develop new language, right? Like there's language we're using now that we weren't using 5 years ago. Or even 2 years ago on all sorts of different issues. And so that's great, but it also can be very dizzying. So I'd like to give you just a few statistics, and if you would like to know where I got these, I will cite that. The first study I'm going to talk about really briefly is called the ACEs study. Has anyone ever heard of this? Oh, a couple people. It is very influential work. that looked at 9 different adverse childhood experiences. So we're going to zoom out as to prevalence rate, and I'm going to start first with, we need to look at what's like happening to us as people. And those 9 items were someone incarcerated in your household, parents separated or divorced, household mental illness, someone in your household had mental illness, substance abuse in household, mother treated violently, interpersonal violence, emotional neglect, emotional abuse, physical abuse, and sexual abuse. Those were the 9 things in the ACEs study. And like millions of people have been sampled to find out how many of you have had these things. And 40% of the, I think it's 17,000, but I'm really reaching. So I think 17,000, 40% of them identified that they had 2 or more of those things in childhood, and 12.5 had 4 or more. And so also we learned from the study how common physical and sexual abuse is. 21% of respondents identified sexual abuse before the age of 18, and 28 identified physical abuse. So this study it exposes how, with a lot of adverse childhood experiences, did kids cause any of these things? No. You know, these things happening, it really ratchets up mental health concerns and sleep disturbance, physical health concerns. It's kind of like the more that gets piled on, there's a lot of difficulty that people face. It kind of makes sense, right? You know, we just now have the science that shares this. So trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, would be one thing that would come from these adverse childhood experiences. But actually, after a trauma, the #1 most common diagnosis is depression, more so than acute post-traumatic stress disorder. And so I'm going to hone into the college level. The American College Health Association's National College Health Assessment, that's a lot of words, 59, found in 2016 that 59% of college students felt overwhelming anxiety. I mean, stress, we know, is going to be ubiquitous, but 60% felt very lonely. That makes my heart hurt. That's so sad. 37% felt so depressed it was difficult to function. Another survey found by a different group found that 40% of students with mental health conditions didn't seek help, and students cited stigma, dun, 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 point of this conversation tonight, as the #1 barrier to accessing mental health services. And in the 2015-2016 school year, 11% of Virginia Tech students came to Cook specifically to seek services, which I'll cover very briefly what Cook offers, since that's where I work. So I started this by saying this has always been here, and we have more language. And some really smart sociologists are seeing some trends impacting people born between 1995 and 2012. And now I'm citing an article you have to read by Jean Twenge, Twenge, in The Atlantic. And I just feel like it's very, as a counselor at Cook, I talk to students all day and really enjoy it. But it does get a little hard to hear about all these individual stories of people feeling so different and other, and so much anxiety to be vulnerable with others, that I kind of want to just start like making tally marks on my wall, so that as I'm listening and someone says, you know, I feel so disconnected, everyone's got it together but me, right, is the belief. I just want to be like, notice tally marks, you know, like everybody who comes in here says it. And so why is that? Is this loneliness factor ratcheting up? So Jean Twenge, a social psychologist, purports that since 2011, 2012, when the number of Americans owning smartphones tipped past 50%, rates of teen depression and suicide skyrocketed. And this one connects. I will stop talking about statistics. I'm sorry, but that was my part of the presentation. So, are we good, y'all? Okay, here I go. I feel like I'm totally on the soapbox. Okay, number of teens, percent of teens who see friends nearly every day, dropped more than 40% from the year 2000 to 2015. And then, anyway, she goes on, and you could tell she's like really not trying to like trash electronics badly, but like she studies these generational shifts, and the graphs in her article are just like depression, social anxiety, suicidality, and it's all like connected to the ubiquitousness of of this device in our hands. Okay, sorry. So it's both and here. Like this has always been here, but and we're getting all this new language for it, which is amazing and wonderful. And there's something that's gaining momentum through this experience of our time on screens. So that's my theory. Things for you to ponder. That's all to ponder. I use screens. My kids use them too, some. So anyway, I'm trying to give some information to help see the context of college students as a whole, and to hope that perhaps that normalizes a little bit of feelings that students have, and that they certainly come and talk to me about. And a good counselor is going to do that. A good counselor is going to listen for, here's your context, okay, at the broadest levels. Okay, here's your, meso-level context, your family, your culture, your religious beliefs. It is totally great to talk about your faith in counseling, no matter the counselor. We're trained to listen and support and help you bring whatever that may be, into the room that can help you. We don't, even those of us that don't identify, as Christian, they can be helpful, and they're trained to help. So, it's kind of it's a hard topic to talk about, right? Especially now. It's not an easy time to identify or to, explore your beliefs, but the therapy room should be, and usually is, a safe place to go there. So I just wanted to mention that as I transition over into what mental health counseling looks like. So a good counselor is going to help look at, all this context, because usually people come in feeling so bad and ashamed and different, and like they don't make sense at all. And a good counselor is going to help you in a gentle way, like look how all this has led to where you are right now. Like all this kind of makes sense, because it always does. And I always feel like people don't come to counseling because they feel that they're not normal, when really half what we do in counseling is helping you realize how normal you are, and how normal your response, your behavior is in your context. So the number one thing that a good counselor is going to be thinking about is building a relationship with you, because this is researched over and over again to be like the most impactful thing about therapy is a therapeutic rapport. And that is the top variable impacting outcome. So something else that I would give guidance to, if you or someone you care about is contemplating seeking counseling, is where I feel sometimes it kind of goes awry, is where some people want like a safe space just to talk. Like I have so many clients who have said, I just feel so much better just to talk. And they just want a safe container, because that's what counseling usually is, with some exceptions and exclusions to privacy. It is a private space to explore. Some people want like strategies, they're just like wanting to shake a person, like tell me what to do and feel and do different. And so if you know where you kind of are on that, strategies, space, like I would encourage you to vocalize that to your counselor, because that, to me, that's where it sometimes is a miss, is where one person's here and the counselor's in another position thinking you need something else. I already said, don't be afraid to talk about your beliefs. Some people benefit from medication. And, people with diabetes, they benefit from medication. That just is what it is. Their body's, it's not working properly, or it's not working the way that you want it to. And so that there's nothing wrong with that. 1/4 of all Americans are on an antidepressant right now. So I'm really curious about that. I'm, curious about what that means, but that's the reality. It's not an abnormal, thing to look into and to ask about. So, but a good counselor is going to, if that is something that interests you at all, then a good counselor is going to explore the pros and the cons of that, with you, and what type. There's lots of classes. If this was like, 15 years ago, there were a few options for this, but now there's tons of options. And if you're not interested in that at all, that's also fine. It's also fine. So a good counselor is going to help you figure out what's in your best interest. That's what we're here to do. That's what we're trained to do, as you see it. So, one more thing I'll say about mental health counseling, or I'll move on now. Accessing counseling. I referenced that your relationship with a therapist is the number one variable impacting outcome. So that can mean you may need to shop. Like if you've tried it once and it wasn't a good fit, that does not mean anything about the next person. So we are quite different, each of us, and there's so many different training models now. There are so many what we call evidence-based treatments that have been researched out the wazoo. So, cognitive behavior therapy might be one person's modality that they're looking at as they're trying to treat some things. Other people, it's like expressive arts. There's so many different types, and that is hard. I'm sorry that we're so diverse as a group of humans, but we are. And our trainings are very different. So, although it's annoying, don't be afraid to shop around is what I would tell you to keep in your mind and let people know. So I am from Cook Counseling, and at Cook we can offer short-term focused therapy. We're not able to do long-term therapy or weekly therapy, even though most of us would love to be able to do that. With the volume of students that we see, it's not something that we're able to do, but I feel like we do a dang good job with the little bit of time that we get with our students. There's not a session cap, but you could expect to be seen about every 3 to 4 weeks, and maybe more if you come in the beginning of the semester. That's the sweet time. If you're thinking about it, that's a good time to go. It's the beginning of the semester. We also offer some amazing workshops on anxiety. I so wish I had this when I was in college. Our anxiety workshop content is full of the latest science on anxiety and biologically what's happening for us when we're anxious. And we also have some amazing group therapy experiences, which are obviously also very different. If you had one group therapy experience, then it doesn't mean very much about the next one. So we also do crisis walk-in. Like if you need to be seen that day, period, then at our McComas office, you can walk in from 8 to 5. 8 to 4:45, let's say that. So we are working to create more partnerships with all the many therapists in the New River Valley, and we keep up to date a really good off-campus provider database that's on our website, and you can kind of filter and search for like what kinds of things you want to talk about, how close or far it is to campus, and what insurance type, and also similar but much more attractive website is Psychology Today, which is kind of the national standard, I would say. Would you agree? Everyone's like, yes. So Psychology Today websites help therapists find each other. It's how we date. You know what I'm saying? How we find one another. I'll sit down now. Okay. Yeah. So I will have some cards that I'll scatter somewhere. I don't know where should I put them? In the back, thank you. Okay, thank you all so much for your time. I can't wait to hear from these great people.
Yeah, thank you, Erica. This idea, it doesn't always help, but But one of the side effects of mental health is this idea of loneliness. And it is helpful most of the time to know that we're actually not alone in this. There are other people that are struggling. That is actually something that is very common. There are people who understand, people who can have good conversations with us, and resources that are available. So our next bit is student testimonies to again help to start having these conversations. This is something that it's hard to tell one person that you're struggling with mental health at times, let alone however many people are here. So we want to make sure we give respect and honor to people who have decided to come forward and share their story. So I'm going to introduce them and then give you guys some notes about it. But kind of going from the side over, our first speaker will be Paige, who is a senior studying biochemistry. Then we have Drew, who is a junior studying biomedical engineering. Will is a senior studying math. Iana is a senior in building construction. And then lastly, we have Julia, who's a sophomore in architecture. So two just kind of notes about this time. So I'm not going to introduce them again, so they'll just kind of go one by one, so you guys can clap after they're done. So just some notes. They are going to be talking about self-harm and suicide, so just be aware that that will be topics that come up. And also, so as it is scary sharing these stories, if there's something that you empathize with or something that you've gone through, you can like put your hands to your heart like this, just so they know they're not alone as they're sharing this. If you want to kind of be with them in that, you can put your hand over your heart like this. Join me in celebrating these people. We'll give them some applause.
Okay, cool. Hi, friends. My name is Paige Ginnity. I'm a senior studying biochemistry. I have attention deficit disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, and social anxiety. I'm also considered more at risk or vulnerable to experiencing depression, and although I have experienced symptoms, I don't completely qualify for a diagnosis. I was diagnosed with ADHD at age of 6, generalized anxiety at age 16, social anxiety at age 19, and informed of my relationship with depression when I was 21. I want to make it clear these are not the ages at which I developed these conditions, but the ages when they were recognized. These are symptoms I've experienced for as long as I can remember, and that can make it difficult to recognize it as abnormal. I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was 6 years old by my first grade teacher. My parents, along with my doctor, decided it would be best for me to start taking medication. Now, I know a lot of people disagree about this, whether kids should be put on medication for these kinds of issues. It's not for everyone, but being on medication improves my quality of life on a near daily basis. I have put a lot of time and thought about how I want to talk about this topic, because it's difficult. I want to emphasize that this is not an easy or quick fix by any means, but it has also made a huge difference in my own life for the better. Any treatment option, including not seeking treatment, comes with its own unique challenges and advantages. If you had a problem with your stomach, your heart, your liver, or your kidneys, you would take medication to fix it. No one would accuse these organs of being lazy or not trying hard enough. So then why is there so much stigma about taking medication to correct brain function? In our culture, when we think about our bodies, we tend to think of our brains as the parts that are the most us. We think that our brains are the parts that contain the parts that make us who we are. But it's important to remember that we are not only our brains, any more than we are our kidneys or our intestines. They are part of us, but they're not all of us. When I started medication, it had some side effects. If I didn't eat enough when I took it, it made me really nauseous, and I threw up every day for almost a month. The medication can also act as an appetite suppressant. I was an already very small child. I remained small for a very long time. Sometimes I wonder if I might have been robbed a possible inch or two off of my height. But the benefits were so much greater than that. I don't think so much so that the medication altered my personality as it allowed me to actually have one. Since the medication I started on was a non-stimulant, it also helped to manage my yet unrecognized anxiety. I was not diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder until I was a sophomore in high school. The symptoms and difficulties I faced challenged my faith. Sitting through church service every Sunday was a struggle, and it felt like torture. I thought reading the Bible was incredibly boring. Praying felt like talking to myself, or talking to an imaginary friend that no one at my age or in their right mind had anymore. I earnestly believed the whole thing was a lie we all told each other, with the mutual unspoken understanding that it was untrue, and that I just wasn't good at lying about it. I assumed that I was not going to be able to grow up to be a strong and contributing member of my church. I assumed I would always be an outsider trying to fit in. That all started to change when I went on my first mission trip. In the people around me, I saw another way. I saw people helping complete strangers and bringing hope and encouragement to both strangers and friends. I remember watching those people and thinking, maybe I could do that, and the excitement of knowing they were serving God. And that's the way I can serve God too. My strengths are in the service of God's kingdom, meeting people where they are, exactly the way they are. I'm incredibly lucky that my story is very unusual, and I'm still on the same medication 15 years later. Most people don't stay on the same medication for that long. The doses increase multiple times because, I'm not 4'2" and 55 pounds like I was when I started taking it. My sophomore year of college at Wesley, there was a sermon series about discrimination. We discussed discrimination in the church related to age, gender, and race. In my mind, the obvious next thing to cover would have been disability. To my surprise, however, this had not at all been part of the plan. I spoke to my pastor about how important I thought it was and volunteered to speak about my own experiences. We had a discussion during worship where I shared my own testimony, and we talked about issues we had seen in the church and things the community could do to be more supportive of people with disabilities. It was an awesome opportunity and experience. I was so lucky to be in the right place in the right time and willing to speak up. In preparing to speak, I was able to reflect back on my own experiences in a way I hadn't been able to for a long time. Since I had gotten to college, my anxiety had become more and more extreme. My freshman year of college is when I was diagnosed with social anxiety. I talked to my parents, and we agreed that I should see a psychiatrist. My psychiatrist agreed that my symptoms of anxiety were severe enough to warrant taking medication. And for the first time in my life, I started taking anti-anxiety medication. 3 medications, and 1 year later, we're still experimenting to try to figure out what will help me. This is a decision I did not take lightly, and it was certainly not the case that all my issues were immediately resolved. In fact, the road has been anything but straightforward. And this past year has been really difficult. If it wasn't for my faith and my attempts to answer God's call in my life, I never would have spoken out about these issues or tried to seek better treatment. There are many moments where if it weren't for my faith, I would have just given up on the whole thing. I would have lied to the people around me and said I was fine, even though I wasn't, to bring an end to this process. I was tempted to abandon my path many times. If this is an experience you've never had, it's very stressful and it takes a lot out of you. The path God has called me to regularly forces me out of my comfort zone. I do things daily that scare me as I try to follow God's will. I have done and am still doing things I never thought I'd be able to. That is territory that does not come without fear, but I trust that God will be with me.
Oh goodness. Alright, so I'm reading off my phone, so if it turns off and I'm fiddling with it, don't get too concerned. My name is Drew Dunn. I'm studying biological systems engineering with a biomedical emphasis. I'm a lifelong Hokie and more importantly, a Christian. My story is of how Christ rescued me from my depravity and sin, and how his people are rescuing me from myself. That is my clinically diagnosed major depressive disorder and generalized anxiety disorder, and all the baggage that comes along with them. And as out of character as it is for myself to be brief, as anyone who knows me will tell you I love to ramble, I'm going to keep the background brief so that we can get to the here and now. I grew up going to church in a wonderful family with lots of friends in a very good Blacksburg school system where I earned amazing grades and excelled in extracurriculars. Yet I've always struggled with bouts of depression and anxiety. Let's just say that college, engineering, the Hokie plague, and family emergencies all put together in the span of a couple weeks made my mental health much, much worse. But my freshman year of college was great. I made Dean's List, I met new friends, and broke out of my goody two-shoes character by learning how to be the life of the party. And boy, could I party. Now, I'm not saying this because I want to lecture you all about how partying leads to all kinds of sin. I'm saying that in my life it did, and I loved it. I loved it because I could sin in college and still have my church family back home hail me as one of the godliest people they knew. But not everybody bought into that idea, especially one of my new, at the time, best friends, Josh. Josh saw my sin, and he called me out on it. Very gently and discreetly, I guess I should add. But Josh, being faithful to God and his word, showed me my need for Christ, my desperate need for Christ, and my utter hopelessness apart from him. Eventually, after about 6 months, his message finally got through to me and I surrendered all to Christ. Finally, I understood the gospel. It had never really clicked until then that because of God's perfect holiness and my complete sinfulness, that there was no way I was going to win God's favor no matter how highly people back in my church thought of me. I realized my only hope was in Christ and his perfect life, his death, and his resurrection that paid for my sins. So I was saved, happily ever after. Or so I thought. Yes, I had been saved from my sin, and yes, this means I was declared perfectly righteous before God. Hallelujah. However, I was also about to be hit by a truck called mental illness. To spare you the details of what led up to this, let's just say that for the next year after becoming a Christian, I was pretty much miserable. I was depressed, which made me tired, which led to me failing all of my classes. It was bad. And my shame made me isolate myself from everyone. My friends, my family, my church, and so from God. Luckily, God didn't isolate himself from me. He actually sought me out, both through my growing desire to get in his word, and through fellow Christians who continued to pursue relationship with me. And not only did these people pursue individual relationships with me, they invited me to a church, to a ministry called Campus Outreach, and to another one called InterVarsity. They showed me what it's like to do life together as the body of Christ. And what did that do for me? It reminded me of that joy that I found in Christ. This made me want to pursue him more, and eventually got me to a point where, though I still struggled daily with depression, I desired to know Christ more than I desired to be happy. And that's where I found my solution. I found that when in community, I didn't have to rely on myself to remind myself to look to Christ. I had a family of brothers and sisters who faithfully did that for me and taught me how to do it myself. And I continued to seek and find joy in Christ. Now, I know this is an odd place to end, as there's no real resolution to my mental health issues. I made some friends and all as well. Not exactly. I fear that as long as I live, I will still struggle with depression and anxiety. We live in a fallen world, and I live in a sinful, scarred, broken body. There are still consequences of sin in my life, but even more so, there's evidence that Christ is working within me and has brought me into a loving community. And that's the important part. That's what keeps me going. What finally allowed me to start getting out of bed in the morning. I can, in my most broken and depressed state, remember Christ's promise. I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world. So when you're lost and broken, come to Christ. The Bible says that his yoke is easy and his burden is light. That is true. And when you feel yourself becoming so weighed down by the world that the command to come to him is too hard, seek community. Seek a God-centered community that is willing to carry you, if need be, to the cross. It saved my life, and it might just save yours. Grace and peace, y'all.
Hello, my name is Will. I'm a senior in studying math here, and I'll try to be brief about my upbringing because my mental health issues don't really start until I'm in college. I grew up in a good Christian home. I had some friends. I struggled with loneliness a lot all the way through high school, but who doesn't, right? So nothing too bad. I have had ADHD. I was diagnosed in elementary school, but it doesn't affect me severely enough that I would say that it impairs me in my day-to-day life. I take medication for it, but it's more for helping me with things like driving or being in class that require really intense focus that I can't get distracted from. The medication does really help, but that's not really what I'm here to talk about. What I'm here to talk about is when I became depressed. So kind of backstory of how that happened. I didn't grow up with depression. But then senior year of high school and freshman year of college, a certain relationship happened. I started dating someone. We dated for a little bit more than a year. And suffice it to say, she was severely emotionally abusive to me. I don't have time to go too deep into the details, but a couple of things that I can say will give you an idea of how bad things were. Let's see, I have seen her self-harm in front of me on more than one occasion. I've also received pictures of fake blood, being told it was real blood that she told me was from her self-harming. She would also occasionally threaten to cheat on me to get leverage. She would also threaten to harm herself or to hurt me in order to get leverage in an argument, or just to make me feel miserable in general when she was not doing well. And all of these things, and there's so much more I could talk about, but I don't have time to. All of this was blamed on me, and she did it so well that I actually believed her. And then the relationship ended, the infatuation fell away, and I realized that I was horribly depressed. This was towards the end of my freshman year of college when this happened. Depression is a lot more than just being sad. That's obviously a symptom. That's something I experienced a lot. I remember the 4 months that made up like the summer after freshman year of college, I cried myself to sleep all but 5 nights, and that's 4 months, just to be clear. All but 5 nights of that, I cried myself to sleep every night. Also, pretty much everything I was passionate about, I lost my interests in. I have a journal in my apartment that I try not to look at this too much, but towards the end of the time when I was struggling with depression, I made a list of all the reasons that I had to live. And there were 5 things on that list. And for most of the time that I struggled with depression, only 2 of them would have been on that list. So that was really, really difficult. But more with depression than sadness, probably the biggest symptom, at least that I'm aware of, is just kind of nothingness. It's not like being between happy and sad. It's just you don't feel anything, and it's torture. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. It got to be so bad at times that there were a couple of instances when I resorted to self-harm in the form of taking exercise way too far just so it would stop because I couldn't take it anymore. And this went on for about a year, and it threw all my Christian upbringing out the window because I just couldn't see how God could exist if I was suffering so much and I wasn't getting help. And the fact that I didn't tell anybody about this for 10 months didn't help either. And then a friend invited me to university, and I came and I gave my life to Christ and started to talk a little bit about it. But actually, when I became a Christian, the first 2 months of my relationship with Christ, it was actually a lot worse. Because not only was I dealing with symptoms of depression like I described before and many others, I was also dealing with the cognitive dissonance of being told that everyone in the university community loved me and that God loved me, when the sentence, "I love you," sounded like someone was saying 2 + 2 = 7. And I'm a math major, so that's pretty much the dumbest thing I can say. But I'm not using that as an exaggeration. I processed those sentences about the same way. If anyone told me they cared about me or they loved me or that I was valuable, it just sounded like 2 + 2 = 7 to me, and I just tossed it out. Fortunately, I don't have too much time to talk about the details of this. I would love to talk to people about this afterwards, but about 2 months into my walk with Christ, God did a miracle in my life, and most of that depression was gone. I can point to a period of time about half a second in length when that happened. There are probably like 5-10 people in this room who were there when it happened and can testify to it, but I don't have time to go into the details of that. But yeah, learning through that, like we worship a God who has power over these things and who can heal and does heal, even today. But even though I have experienced pretty awesome healing in my life, that's not to say that all my mental health issues are gone. Even though I can't be diagnosed with any mental health issues right now, I wouldn't get diagnosed on any of the tests with it. That's not to say that my mental health is good. I was talking to some of the speakers right before the start, and I jokingly said to them, I kind of have like 5 different things, but that's true. I've been in a relationship for about a month now, which has been awesome, and I love her, but because so much of my trauma has to do with relationships, I've been having a lot of flashbacks recently. And we've been dating for about a month, and I've had about 20 so far, something around there, that range in severity from just being really uncomfortable for 5 to 10 minutes to one in particular that lasted an hour. I couldn't stop crying, I could barely move my body, and I couldn't control my breathing. And the next day I had what I think the term for it is a psychosomatic limp, if you don't know what that means. Basically, my brain was so traumatized and confused that it thought that my body must have been hurt, and then it just guessed randomly where that injury was, and it decided that my left knee was hurt. So I walked around with a limp for a whole day, and that was terrifying. And having to deal with that is still really scary and really hard. I also have spells of depression from time to time. I might have had a panic attack on Tuesday, I'm not sure. I have had an anxiety attack that lasted 24 hours before, towards the beginning of this past summer. So there's a lot of mental health issues that I do deal with, and it is a day-to-day thing. So kind of think the biggest thing I've taken away from this is you don't have to be suicidal to need help or want to go to help. I was never suicidal. There were certainly times when I would cross a street and the first thought in my head was, oh, I hope that I didn't see a car and I just die right now, because I just wanted life to be over. I didn't want to kill myself, but I just wanted it all to stop. And you don't have to be diagnosable to seek help. In fact, last year when I wasn't dealing with depression and couldn't really have been diagnosed with anything, I went to 2 semesters of therapy at Cook, and it was awesome. It was really helpful for me. And kind of similar to what Drew said, I would say that probably the best thing you can do other than seeking professional help, if you're suffering in any way, whether it be depression, anxiety, or if you're just having a bad week, is to find a community. Come to InterVarsity, Campus Outreach, Wesley, RUF, just any of the things here. And there's a thing outside, there's a trifold that has, I think, all of the campus ministries on it. Find people, find community, find people you get along well with, and you can share what's going on, and that can be a great help. Thank you.
Hi. My name is Iana, and I go to Blacksburg Ablaze Church. I'm a 22-year-old super senior majoring in building construction, and I'm graduating this December. That's the same spiel I gave to the people at the career fair this morning, by the way. I personally have not been diagnosed with an actual disorder, but depression and anxiety have both played a large role in my life. I've always been an emotional person, and sometimes the smallest things would set me off, but it wasn't until the fall of 2015 that I realized I had a serious problem with depression. It all started when I graduated high school in 2014. I grew up in a Christian household, but my relationship with God was pretty much non-existent, and all I really cared about since I was like 5 was getting a boyfriend. So when the opportunity presented itself in the form of a non-Christian classmate, I took it. I impulsively asked my friend out, and he said yes, even though we had no idea what the future held for us. My parents found out about our relationship and demanded that we break up, for good reason. And instead of listening to them, I continued our relationship in secret. I became a liar who desperately clung to a relationship even though I knew it wasn't good for either of us. A little over a year passed, and I was in denial about being deeply depressed and suicidal. The more I hid from people, the more I believed I was worthless. I still continued my relationship, and I kept running away from God. I went to church and attended Bible study at Ablaze, but no one really knew who I was. I believed that everyone there had their lives together, and I was incapable of being loved by God. I wore a mask and pretended to be okay, but on the inside I was lost, broken, and numb. My depression worsened and my studies started to suffer. I would cry myself to sleep most nights and wake up in the morning unable to convince myself that going to class was worth it. I stopped doing my homework, and I kept refusing the people who wanted to help me feel better. My poor then boyfriend, and as well as my Bible study leader who had opened up to me about her struggle with depression, were convinced I needed help, but I refused their suggestions to see a therapist. I found comfort in thoughts of suicide, and I was convinced I would kill myself by the end of 2015. Then one of my friends found out that I was planning to commit suicide and convinced me to live for the good things in life. I suddenly became very afraid of dying, and I slowly started believing that life was worth living. When I came back to Tech in the spring of 2016, I told my Bible study leader that I was going to start therapy at Cook Counseling. She was super supportive and even offered to walk me to my first session. And slowly but surely, I started to piece my life back together. I ended my relationship, I went through a semester of therapy, I retook the 3 classes that I failed. Yeah, that happened because of depression. And I started to get involved with my church, Ablaze. The girls at Ablaze were wonderful and supportive and encouraged me to grow in my relationship with God. And much to my surprise, I found out that some of them struggled with depression too. And since then, I've learned and changed so much. Sorry, it's kind of cold in here. God has healed my brokenness and shame, and He truly continues to fight for me. Even though it was the hardest thing I had to do, I told my parents the truth about my past secret relationship, and it was so worth it. My relationship with my parents now isn't perfect, but we're definitely doing better because of this. I also found that it's okay to be vulnerable and that God puts people in our lives so that we can encourage and love each other. In terms of where I am in life, I believe that God's calling for me rests in helping others with the same struggle. I no longer consider myself depressed, but on some days it can be hard for me to feel joy. I still sometimes get attacked by hopeless thoughts and feelings of numbness, but when that happens, I know who I can talk to about it. I know that it's okay to not be okay, because it's in those moments that God's power can work the most in my life. God is with us, and He uses the people around us to show us love. I have found so many lifelong friends in Ablaze, and God has even blessed me with a new, much healthier relationship. I know that I can reach out to them for prayer and encouragement when I'm not okay, and it's such a beautiful blessing. So if you're struggling, please don't keep it to yourself. I know that it's hard, but I guarantee that being vulnerable to God and to those around you is so worth it. You're never alone.
Hi, so my name is Julia. I'm a sophomore in architecture, and I go to the Wesley Methodist School. So earlier this semester, while going through the motions of church worship, I was struggling with how it didn't seem to matter what I did, because even with doing worship, none of my depression and anxiety seemed to be ever getting better. And when I was in high school, I was super involved in my church. I did Sunday school, Bible studies. I was never late for anything. And I pretty much volunteered all of my free time at church. So if getting on good terms with Christ was a job interview, my resume was perfect. But I still struggled with anxiety and depression. I've been on medicine on and off since middle school. I've dealt with parents divorcing, sexual assault, just a whole list that could go on that centered around feelings of loneliness and sadness and never feeling good enough. And all of these emotions were circling in my head as I was standing there in worship, singing the worship songs without actually singing them. Because honestly, I was just pissed at God. I was dealing with the day-to-day struggles of all the trauma and the bad brain chemicals, but I still stuck with the church. Adults at my home church would say, and they would praise me for being 16, 17, 18 and still sticking with the church, because most kids don't go to church at that point, especially with all the crap that I was dealing with. And every time I thought things were finally to get better, like when you go on a church trip and you start to feel good for a weekend, the next week, everything would just seem to fall apart again. I don't remember what it's like to go 2 weeks without having an overwhelming feeling of wanting to die, wanting to go to bed and never get up, and just plain being irresponsible by not using a seatbelt or drinking too much. I felt abandoned by the godly people who said that they loved me no matter what, and I felt left behind by God. But in the middle of all this chaos that I was feeling at that moment, I heard God say, "I have never left you alone. In every episode of your life, I've given you solid Christian friends." Sometimes those friends ended up fading away as life changed, but I was never left alone without someone who's at least a little bit stronger than I was to hold my hand. This epiphany was followed by a flood of memories of the different times that God came through for me when I wasn't expecting it. Middle school was when the depression that I recognize today started. I was still going through the motions of being a Christian, but I wasn't believing it wholeheartedly. I didn't go to youth like I used to, and I only occasionally went to church with my parents. I was self-harming and had my first experience with an abusive relationship. I felt like things would never get better again. My parents weren't the rock that I needed, and my friends couldn't be the support that I needed because of just how bad the depression had gotten. And eventually, I thought a lot about it, and I picked a weekend that I was going to kill myself. But the day before, that Saturday, I was at a cross-country race. The school where we were racing at hosted one of the biggest events of the year. So that would have been the only time that I saw one of my friends from church because she ran for a school that was far away from me. Between races, we ran into each other, exchanged some small talk, and she asked me if I wanted to go to youth with her tomorrow. She said, "Hey, me and our friends, we miss hanging out with you, you should come back to youth." And for some reason, I said yes. So for a moment, I was a little bit frustrated with how I had double booked my Sunday night. But I felt like I could push that off one more day. That night at church, I had the most fun that I had had in a really long time. Later that night, I told my friend what I was planning, and she got me in contact with our youth pastor, and her and I talked a lot that night. She convinced me to start counseling with her, and in this story, God had insane timing. And it's a weekend I still think about a lot. That Sunday night, and getting help for my depression was a revitalization of my love for the church and with God. God also had amazing timing again last year. When I was a freshman struggling to find a campus ministry, I was struggling with my identity and my sexuality and this whole conflicting feeling of having to pick my religion over these very real feelings that I felt. And so I decided to take a New Testament class because I wanted to learn for myself what God wanted me to do with my life. And it seemed the more I learned, the more questions I had. But I was talking to this girl who was also in my New Testament class with me, and it took her weeks, but she finally convinced me to come to her youth group and come to her small group later that night. And then eventually I started going to worship at Wesley and going to other events and just making friends and making that community that we've all talked about is super important. And while this God story isn't as dramatic as the middle school one, I feel like it's just as important in shaping who I am because I had this really safe environment that I could talk about how I felt and what I thought about, and we could all spend time worshiping God together. And the way I would finish freshman year is I felt like I wasn't in conflict with God anymore, and that was really reassuring. So these are just two big examples of how God never left me alone. But God has provided so much more than that. God has given me people that let me cry in their car, have panic attacks in their apartment, people that encourage me to be the best version of myself. God gave me the courage to talk to people about my own mental health, and sometimes that means saying yes to something you wouldn't normally go to, or that means reaching out to a friend. God didn't go anywhere when I was going through my waves of depression. He may not cure my mental health, but He is always there to make sure that the people He has put in my place, to make sure I'm never alone.
So something cool that my church does, we have this idea called hand praise. So it's not just clapping to say thank you for sharing, it's also clapping for praising the Lord for how He is working. Are you guys going to join me in some hand praise? So our final speaker for the night is Rosa Jones. She came to Tech for grad school. And is now currently living in Christiansburg in the area. Her counseling service is called Freedom Support Services. She is also a co-pastor at Surge Ministries. So she's going to be kind of talking about a Christian perspective on mental health. So join me in welcoming her.
Hello, everybody. It is wonderful to be here on this evening and just to be a part of this conversation. I actually own a private practice in Christiansburg and have spent many years working with college students as an administrator and now working in the private sector and see a lot of students. And so it was really exciting to come and to be a part of this conversation on tonight. I do co-pastor at Surge Ministries in Christiansburg, and we have a student organization on campus. I pastor along with my husband, Pastor JJ, if any of you have met him. He knows everybody. Everybody knows JJ. So yes, it is just such a joy to be here and just to share a little bit about mental health from the Christian perspective. My private practice it's just general. It's not specifically a Christian practice, and for me, that's just really been an important thing because I know that I'm a vessel by the Lord, and whoever I come in contact with has an opportunity to encounter Jesus, whether they believe or not. So that's really exciting for me. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about mental health from the Christian perspective. And I think there's some really basic things that we need to understand. Is that one, you were created in the image of God. Amen. We're all created in the image of God. And the thing about him is that he is perfect. Wow. And you know, and I've thought about this, I've been thinking about this a lot. I'm like, well, I wonder if some of our desire to be perfect is because he's perfect, you know? But the great thing about him and his experience, you know, and in sending Jesus Christ to the earth is that he's able to experience life the way that we experience it. And so the thing about it, it's important to know that we are created in his image. So we have purpose and we have desires and we have passions. The other thing that's important to know is that God feels. He feels. He feels. There are so many people within the culture today that I think sometimes just really do. We have a tendency to shy away from emotions. We have a tendency to ignore what's going on inside of us. And I think it is super important for us to remember that God is a God who feels. You know, when you read in Genesis, it talks about how he created us and he looked at us and he said, ooh, that is good, you know? He was taking delight in us. He was taking delight in us and he took great joy and pleasure. Those are emotions. Those are strong emotions. He feels. And then, you know, once we were doing something else, good old Eve and Adam, you know, they did what they did, just sinning, disobeying God. He also said, oh, I regret making you. That's a feeling. You know, he was very disappointed. He was upset. And so, you know, he feels, and we're created in his image, so we feel. It's okay to feel. And it's super important for us to be aware of what's going on inside of us. It's very difficult for us to navigate through this life successfully if we don't have the self-awareness. And so, you know, having that self-awareness, and self-awareness really has to do with just knowing yourself. And the incredible thing about knowing God, if we can press in and strengthen our relationship with God and develop that relationship, as we know him, we come to know ourselves because we are created in his image. And so that self-awareness is super important. And so there are all sorts of things that we feel, that we experience, that if we just press them down, or we ignore them, or we don't ask questions, like we don't understand, why is it that when people cut me off in a conversation, I go, you know, feel your blood boil? Or why is it that, you know, if someone says they're going to call me, or nobody calls these days, text me, if I text somebody and they don't text me back, 39, if I text somebody and they don't text me back, you know, I start to feel sad, you know, I feel lonely. You know, what is that about? But really slowing down to explore what is it that's really going on with some of the ways that we feel. So we really should pay attention to our feelings. I'm going to read this little excerpt from you. God is so meticulous in that when Will was talking to me about coming to speak here, I was also simultaneously started reading a book that we're using as a part of our life group called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. If you've never read it, then you need to get it and read it. It really talks about, the subtitle is that we can't be spiritually mature if we are emotionally unhealthy. And that is God honest truth. We cannot mature and be mature in the things of God if emotionally we are just like really jacked up. But I'm going to read this little excerpt that really highlights the importance of why we need to be aware of our feelings. It says, ignoring our emotions is turning our back on reality. Listening to our emotions ushers us into reality, and reality is where we meet God. Emotions are the language of our soul. They are the cry that gives the heart a voice. However, we often turn a deaf ear through emotional denial, distortion, or disengagement. We strain out anything disturbing in order to gain tenuous control of our inner world. We are frightened and ashamed of what leaks into our consciousness. In neglecting our intense emotions, we are false to ourselves and lose a wonderful opportunity to know God. We forget that change comes through brutal honesty and vulnerability before God. And I just love that. And I heard some of the speakers talking about vulnerability with other people and, really being able to let our guards down enough to share in ways that are appropriate and connect. And it's very difficult to do that with other people when we're not doing that with God. Because, all of these things, they're vertical, our relationship with God, and then it reflects out into how we interact and engage with other people. And so that vulnerability is such a key piece. I also wanted to just share a little bit about a lot of times, in the Christian community, of course, big thing is sin. We struggle with sin. That's something that we struggle with until we see the Father and we come face to face and we're perfect. But oftentimes, and I thought about this, in mental health, we talk about mental illness often just being a symptom of a problem. And I look at sin the very same way. If you think about the things in your life that may be a struggle, a thing that may be a struggle for me, if it's not just, let's say for instance, that a person, maybe they're sinning and they are, given to drunkenness. We could use that, drunkenness. Drinking till they black out all the time. It's like, oh, I love God, but woo, that turn up. I drink till I black out. You just, that's a sin. And it's like, woo, we get it, it's a sin. But if we explore a little deeper, we dig a little deeper, it's not just about the drinking. There are reasons why people drink until they black out. Some of it may be social isolation of feeling left out. And so they feel like in certain situations they have to do things so that they can fit in. Some people may feel intense pain because of trauma or hurt in their past, and they drink until they black out because they get sick and tired of thinking about things that are hurtful. So like that, if we think about what is it that's going on in our life, and I don't know about you, but there have been things in my life where I'm like, oh God, forgive me, help me. Take a deeper look. Ask the Lord, ask the Holy Spirit to help you to uncover, what is going on beneath all of this? Because I want to shift, and our emotions really provide just some wonderful explanations and opportunities for us to get in touch with what's really going on in our lives. Let's see here. Several of the speakers talked about how important it is to honor your heart and your mind as much as we honor our spirit and our body. And that is so important, and I really loved hearing that from the students, just about how, if you broke your leg, would you just be like, oh, my leg's broken? Guess I'll just drag this thing around campus. No! Unless you're a construction worker, because people in construction break things all the time and they don't get it fixed. That's true. But if you're a construction worker here, you know I'm telling the truth. You would not do that. You know, you would go to the doctor, you would, you know, get an x-ray, maybe painkillers, casting. You would do whatever it is that you need to do so that you can function. And it is interesting that we just can dishonor our hearts and our minds in that way, to be feeling off kilter, and to be aware that something is wrong, but to just totally ignore it. Just totally ignore it, you know. And it's not always about seeking counseling right away. It could be that, but it could be just talking to someone that you trust about how you're feeling and what's going on with you. You know, that can be a beginning. That really can be a great beginning. And so, you know, think about it. We honor our body, you know, our brains, our hearts, our emotions. It's all a part of what God has created, and we do need to find ways to honor that and to push past the stigma and the shame. One of the other things that I wanted to talk about in regards to Christians and mental health, one of the things that's been really important to me in helping understand and people understand, and I deal with this a lot because I'm also a pastor, is how the gifts of the Spirit, or like, you know, spiritual offices, being a pastor or an evangelist or things of that nature, or having spiritual gifts, you know, it doesn't kind of give us a card that make us exempt from experiencing distress, you know, and things regarding mental health issues. And so I think, you know, that's one of those things that we really have to be careful about. I, you know, am a mental health professional, and I think that it's super duper important to, you know, to honor the mind, the heart, the body, all of those things. Sometimes in Christian communities, there can just be such a stigma around that because, and someone said it before, it's like, well, you're going to see a counselor? Well, you must not trust God. You know, shame on you. Or you taking medication? You don't believe in the Holy Spirit? What's wrong with you? You know? You know, and I've gotten into it with some people about these things because it's just irresponsible. It's ignorant and it's irresponsible. Yes, it's ignorant, and yes, it's irresponsible. Because, you know, when we're talking about mental health issues, for some people it may be things that are mild, and then other times there are things that are severe and very life-threatening. And so it is important to note that just because we're a believer, that it doesn't mean that we're exempt from any of that. You know, we suffer right along with everybody else. In addition to that, it's also important to know that, you know, if you're a person or you're in a sect, Christians, believers who believe in, you know, laying on our hands, and I think Will was talking about this, sometimes you get the Spirit and you're like out on the floor, woo, you know, and you feel the power of God over you and you receive your healing. Hallelujah. And he talked about it. That's real, and we're thankful for that. And any type of deliverance, which is all that is healing, has to be maintained. It has to be maintained. And so most of the time, you know, if we have experiences like that, once we get up, it's great and we can feel that release and that shift. But we also have to be careful to maintain our mental and emotional health, which means, you know, if you struggle with depression or anxiety or bipolar disorder, you know, it's not going to be wise of you to just be like, well, I'm just free. You know, I'm sorry. These are the people I know. And then just say, well, forget that. You know, I'm on medication. I'll throw that in the trash can. You should probably talk to your doctor before you do that. Or, you know, I've been practicing these strategies, my deep breathing. I don't need any of that no more. And you stop using your strategies. It'll probably come back to bite you at some point. But it's just like any other part of our health. If we do not go and get our teeth cleaned, okay? What's gonna happen? What's gonna happen if you don't get your teeth cleaned? Thank you, you're gonna get cavities, right? They might fall out, your breath might stink, like all kinds of things can happen to you. which we have to take care. A part of care is maintenance. And so, you know, I'm just a warning about hyper-spiritualizing things. And then the other question that I had was just how can we help those who are hurting? A lot of them really spoke to that already in some really powerful ways. The only things that I would add is one, if someone tells you that they're going to kill themselves, believe them, okay? If someone tells you that, people, when they say that, they're saying that because what they're saying is that I want some help, okay? And so, you know, when people say things like that, help them get the help that they need, okay? The other thing that we can do is to pray for those who are hurting, to pray with them and to pray for them. You know, if you see people or you know people around you in your communities or just in different places and you get the sense that they're really struggling with something, don't be afraid to pray, you know, and to intercede on their behalf. Prayer is very powerful. Everybody said it, it's, you know, a big part of our mental health and a lot of what people are facing in this culture is just isolation and being lonely. Get involved in a group. I heard so many people say, yeah, and then I went to a small group, and that's where things happen, you know, when we're connected with other people. So trying to, you know, get yourself connected with others, to come out of isolation and helping others do the same. And then, you know, definitely from the spiritual standpoint, finding somewhere where you are to worship. You know, there are lots of wonderful things that happen when we are in corporate worship. You know, hearing the word, singing the songs. There's oftentimes so much healing that can take place in our lives when we are in the presence of God. So not taking that lightly. You know, it's wonderful to, you know, do small groups and things, but, you know, also find somewhere to worship corporately and go with as often as you can. I would also say spend time alone with God. Cry out to Him. Listen, sit, dance, sing, do whatever it is that you gotta do. Okay? But spending time with God and, you know, figuring out how is it that I best connect with the Father and doing those things. Because if we are communicating with Him and talking with Him and positioning ourselves to hear from Him, it sets us up just to be able to experience more peace in our lives and more joy and more hope. And yes, and the only other thing that I would say, and you know, talk a little bit about medication management, that is, you know, definitely an individual decision for people who may be dealing with issues. But I would also, and always encourage, because for me it's the responsible thing to do, that if someone is, and I don't care if you're Christian, non-Christian, whatever, but if someone is especially experiencing some mental health issue that is very significant and is crippling, it's impairing, it's depression that, you know, is moderate and severe, and it keeps coming back over and over and over and over again, or, you know, living with bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. It is okay to have conversations with your doctor about medication management. You know, I would really encourage I encourage people to gather information. You know, you have to make your own decisions about what's right for you, but sometimes, as you heard, medication versus no medication can make a serious difference in people's quality of life. You know, I have lots of clients who are Christians, non-Christians, who, you know, they have different beliefs about that, but it can mean the difference for some people from being able to work and their professional job and be productive and functional in society versus spending their life in and out of the hospital, the psychiatric hospital. And so, you know, and that's real. And, you know, we all have to make our own decisions about how to manage our health, but I really encourage people to do their research, to ask questions, and to get information, because, you know, that's the responsible thing to do. That's all I have. God bless you all.
Yeah, thank you, Rosa. So we're going to have a time of question and answer. So there's this mic and there's that mic over there if people want to come forward and ask questions. So you can ask questions about how do you care for friends struggling with mental health. You can ask questions about their stories, just kind of an open floor for questions. So couple of ground rules. Some of these questions might be better answered in more of a smaller setting. So some of the speakers, if you ask a question like that, might say, hey, let's talk about that afterwards, or might be not the great time to talk about it. And then, so you can ask just a question to the panel, but it might be helpful to direct your questions. So you can say, this is a question for the counselors, or this is a question for the students, or you can ask a particular person. So I'm gonna remind you of their names if you need that. So Erica is first, then we have Paige, Drew, Will, Iana, Julia, and Rosa. So those are their names, or you can ask students or counselors. So I'm gonna open up the microphones for some question and answer.
This is for Erica and Rosa. So 2 points before the question, I don't know if you need this microphone or not. There exists a stigma around getting counseling or receiving mental health help, but counseling and things like that are very valuable things, and I find value in those things. So how do I, understanding both of those points, lovingly but confidently tell someone, hey, I think you need counseling kind of thing? How do I tell someone, hey, I think you have a problem kind of thing, and I want you to get help from that, but I also don't want to come off of saying, hey, you got a problem. What is the balance between them? I think it depends case by case, but are there any thoughts on that right now?
That's a great question. Well, I think, love covers over a multitude of blunders, in talking. So, maybe saying, hey, I was at this thing and they were talking about this, and I kind of hear that. I don't know, just kind of wonder if counseling might be helpful. I'm so sad to see you struggling, and circle back to how it's hard for you that you care for them. It might be a way to frame it, for sure. And tying it back to what you've heard about or learned, about mental health and counseling, what it is. Rosa?
Yeah, and I think, it may not be the first time that they've heard something like that. And so I think it just takes courage just to say, I'm really concerned about you, and I really enjoy listening to you and helping you sort through the issues of your life. However, at this point, maybe you need to talk with someone who, has more experience with this, and so many people are nervous about engaging in counseling. I have people call me every day and they're on the phone like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm doing this. Hi, my name is so-and-so. So it's normal, for people to be nervous, but just saying, I'm not judging you, but I'm just telling you because I care about you. And I want you to, just to be able to enjoy your life and be happy.
And at Cook, people can bring friends with them. So you can offer to walk people over, and we wouldn't really ever tell a friend they couldn't come in the room unless the identified client didn't want them there. So.
Thank you both.
This question is highly anticipated.
Hi there, this is for everyone. Seeking help is, as we've discussed tonight, really important for our mental health. And that comes in sometimes forms of counseling and medication, but those things cost money. And sometimes those things cost money that people cannot currently afford to give. So does anyone up here know of any great resources or funds for low-income individuals who are looking for medications or counseling?
We are very fortunate in this area to have New River Valley Community Services, which is the Community Services Board, which is one option, and they do have an office here in Blacksburg off of University City Boulevard. If people don't have insurance, and even if they do, they don't turn anyone away. And so that can be a great starting place. And they also have a pharmacy as well. A lot of people don't know that. So that's one great option. The other one that I can think of is in all of the small localities here, a lot of them in Montgomery County, like in Christiansburg, there's like the free clinic of the NRV. A lot of people go there for health services, but they also provide mental health services as well. Same thing, income-based, walk-in, that sort of assistance. So those are two really big resources, and they don't turn people away.
Tech also has two other offices, not to be confusing, but marriage and family therapists in training are in a clinic on University City Boulevard, right next to NRVCS, called the Family Therapy Center, and their cost is like $5 per session, and you can get, again, towards the beginning of the semester, you can get a little more regular frequency, as well as Psychological Services Center, psychologists in training. So those are low-cost options. And generic antidepressants are super cheap, like $4. Yeah. So some newer meds will be more expensive, but some of those have been around quite a while.
Yeah, and last little point, I think it's worth noting that if you're a student at Virginia Tech, Cook is completely free. And they have counseling and they have psychiatry services, so you can get medication there, you can get counseling there. So, and I think if you're a staff or faculty too, I think it's no.
Well, staff and faculty have the EAP, which is you get 4 free sessions.
Okay, yeah, so there's that as well.
There was also a large boom of new drugs that were made in the early 90s, and after a 10-year period, those drugs are able to have generics. So me personally, my medication for 30 days used to cost $75 and now costs only $10. I almost jumped out of my skin when the pharmacist told me that. So it is getting better, slowly but surely.
And I guess the last little plug I should put, since this is also a Christian event, although I'm not claiming that it will ever replace professional counseling or especially medication, like many of us talked about, community, the power of community, and in this context, a good Christian community. As Christians, we claim that the Bible does have solutions to our problems. Maybe not cures to diseases, which is unfortunate, but it has solutions. It gives you, like in my own testimony, if you're struggling with depression, you can find joy and a community that helps you cope with it. So obviously, seek professional help if you even think you need it, but also seek other community, because from my own experience, going to a counselor one-on-one is great, but if you are still isolating yourself, the other 6 days of the week, it's really not going to do you that much good. So.
All right, thank you all.
Any final questions? Do you have a question? Or are you just walking to your seat? Cool. Always hard to tell. Yeah, thank you guys for coming tonight. So it took, quite a few people to put this on, so we want to give them some honor. Some of our sponsors who have tables out back, you guys can go and talk to InterVarsity that I myself represent, Bradley Study Center, Campus Outreach, RUF, Wesley, Cook Counseling, PALS Program, and GB Ministries are sponsors that help make this possible. Also, all of this was kind of birthed and organized from 2 students, Will and Paige, 2 of our students kind of, sat down one day. They did a lot of the groundwork of, contacting speakers, making sure we had tables and sound. Many hours were poured into this. So thank you guys for doing that. So a couple of next steps that can be helpful, just kind of summarizing what was said. One of the most helpful things that I found is just to be honest with your friends. It can be really hard and scary to kind of have a conversation with someone. So when we have those conversations, make sure we listen well, make sure we love our people well by listening to them. But engage with your friends, have conversations, ask them not just how they're doing, but how are they really doing, and be there to give them space to share. Also, if you feel like you might, or have a glimmer of feeling that you should go to counseling, there are services available at Cook Counseling. There are ones in town. Find those spaces, take advantage of that. I have done that myself. There is no stigma, there is no shame. And then join a community on campus. Again, there are tables out back. of communities, different Christian communities on campus, find people, find a space to talk, continue having these conversations. Let this not be a blip event, but something that is a start of something on campus. And then after this, after we close, we're actually going to have some of the speakers up here praying for people. So if you want to come receive prayer, we'll be up front and you guys can come and receive that. So thank you guys so much for coming. Yeah, we are super excited to have had this event. If you'll join with me in prayer, we'll pray and then we'll close. Father, Son, and Spirit, yeah, thank you for being in this space. Thank you for these stories and the way that you've been working through them. You take, all of our unique messiness and you use it for your kingdom. Yeah, thanks for the courage that people had to share. Lord, would this be something that continues in this space? That you care for each and every one of us. You love us like crazy. Would that be something that we feel? Will we feel your peace and your joy today, forever, and the rest of the days of our life, Lord? We pray these things in your name. Amen. Yeah, so may the Lord, bless and keep you and make his face to shine upon you. Thank you for coming. Yeah, we're happy to have had you. Good night.